figure stood at Arrakis' edge, where endless dunes whispered beneath a blood-red sun. Sealed greenhouses loomed in the distant seminoliths of stifled knowledge. The spice clung to the air, sweet, venomous. Wind carried echoes of lost experiments. What did the Imperial Conservatory's silent gardens hold? Answers that could bend Fremen Venemou's fate, undo the Bene Gesserit's ancient weave, a truth smothered by time and sand. The silent gardens did not grow spice. They studied its mutation, charted how it rewired life. The Bene Gesserit burned these records to shape Fremen blood, to twist evolution into a blade. The Imperium strengthened its specialization as a fracture. What if the spice's true gift was not power but choice? A choice the Fremen never had. What price does a species pay when its future is another's experiment? What did the Imperial Conservatory's forbidden gardens know about spice that the Bene Gesserit buried forever? Beneath Arrakis' first dunes, sealed chambers held truths the Sisterhood could not risk. Spice did not merely amplify prescience, it rewrote it. The earliest experiments showed mutation was not random but guided, a tool, a lock. The Bene Gesserit's breeding plan was not born in the Jihad's shadow. It was seated in silence, in the dust of unrecorded trials. They watched spice bind minds to futures, not as gifts but as chains. Every vision a prisoner's window. Every choice a scripted step. The Fremen were not chosen, they were designed. Their bodies shaped by generations of hidden crosses, their wills honed to serve a destiny no oracle could foresee. The silent gardens did not grow spice, they grew understanding. How to harness the spice-born seer, how to mold the prescient mind into an instrument. When the time came, the records were sealed, the knowledge became legend. Only the echoes remain whispers in the sand, the Fremen's uncanny unity, the price of a future never theirs to name. What is a prophet but a puppet with a crown? The Sisterhood's greatest experiment was not in bloodlines but in erasure. A future carved from what was buried. Before Arrakis became Rakis, the Imperial Conservatory's glass domes held a library of living data. Spice seeped through roots, its mutagenic whispers decoded in charts no emperor saw. Researchers traced how even dusting the skin could twist cells toward ascension evolution compressed into lifetimes. The Bene Gesserit watched. Their own designs for the Kwisatz Haderach crumbled against this raw, uncurated power. They did not burn the greenhouses. They sealed them, glass blackened by the sands of their own making. Terraforming erased the dome's footprints, but not the truth they held. Spice was not a tool, but a catalyst. A force that defied breeding programs, that answered no master but the dunes themselves. The heretics renamed the planet, but the old name lingers in forgotten logs. What did the silent gardens know? How deep did their maps of mutation go? The Bene Gesserit's erasure was not a failure. It was a cage for knowledge, for potential, for a future that might have outrun their design. The wind still carries the weight of what was buried. The fire in the conservatory's vaults burned blue, not the orange of flame, but the cold, hungry hue of erasure. Scrolls blackened, their glyphs dissolving into ash that clung to the air like static. The Bene Gesserit moved with the precision of architects, not destroyers. Not destroyers shattered, each ledger consumed, a brick laid in the wall of ignorance. They knew what they erased, maps of spice's true hunger, its capacity to weave prescience not as a flicker, but a tide. The Fremen, left to stumble through half-truths, would never see the full pattern. A failed experiment lingered in the dust. The honored matters, those twisted echoes of a miscalculation bred not from Fremen stock, but from the same mutagenic trials. Their bodies, warped by premature exposure, became a warning, a dead end. Yet their rage survived, a shadow of what might have been if the data had endured. The Bene Gesserit's shadow stretched long, but cracks formed where light once pooled. The wind howls through Arrakis' bones now, carrying the scent of burned parchment. Beneath the dunes, the silence of the gardens hums. What might the Fremen have become, unshackled from the Bene Gesserit's design? A people not shaped by stolen knowledge, but by choice. The spice still mutates, blind and ravenous, but its song is muted, the future it could have sung-stilled. The garden's silence is not peace, it is a held breath, a debt unpaid. The weight of what was buried does not fade, it festers. The fire in the conservatory's vaults burned blue, not the orange of flame, but the cold, hungry hue of erasure. Scrolls blackened, their glyphs dissolving into ash that clung to the air like static. The Bene Gesserit moved with the precision of architects, not destroyers. Each vial shattered, each ledger consumed, a brick laid in the wall of ignorance. They knew what they erased, maps of spices' true hunger, its capacity to weave prescience not as a flicker, but a tide. The Fremen, left to stumble through half-truths, would never see the full pattern. A failed experiment lingered in the dust. The honored matters, those twisted echoes of a miscalculation bred not from Fremen stock, but from the same mutagenic trials. Their bodies, warped by premature exposure, became a warning, a dead end. Yet their rage survived, a shadow of what might have been if the data had endured. The Bene Gesserit's shadow stretched long, but cracks formed where light once pooled. The wind howls through Arrakis' bones now, carrying the scent of burned parchment. Beneath the dunes, the silence of the gardens hums. What might the Fremen have become, unshackled from the Bene Gesserit's design? A people not shaped by stolen knowledge, but by choice. The spice still mutates, blind and ravenous, but its song is muted, the future it could have sung-stilled. The garden's silence is not peace, it is a held breath, a debt unpaid. The weight of what was buried does not fade, it festers. The silent gardens breathed in the sand. Their glass was not of this world, forged to trap humidity, to choke the truth of spice's mutation. Beneath their sealed domes, the Imperial Conservatory scholars had mapped the Fremen's genetic tide, how spice did not merely enhance but rewrite, how every grain harvested was a thread in a being who would see time as a wound. They called it heresy, they called it instability, so they burned the data, not in fire but in silence. The garden's knowledge was erased, their archives salted with lies. What use is a tool if its edge cannot be honed? The Fremen, unaware, drank the wind. Their bodies, shaped by generations of spice dust, became vessels for the very secrets the gardens had buried. Paul Atreides did not inherit prescience. He stumbled into it, a boy drowning in visions the Bene Gesserit had once predicted, then discarded. Their religion, so carefully woven into Fremen faith, became a noose, the stillsuits they taught the Fremen to wear. Lined with fibers that absorbed not just water, but the genetic residue of spice. Every prayer to the water carrier was a step toward a being who would see the Empire's end as a birth. The Bene Gesserit had sought a pawn. They bred for patience, for subtlety, for the quiet unraveling of empires. But the garden's suppressed truths had already taken root. The Fremen's prescience was not a gift, it was a correction. A reckoning for every generation that had starved knowledge to feed power. The sandworms, once masters of Arrakis, now bowed to a being who saw their own birth in the dunes. The conservatory's final act was not conquest. It was the closing of the garden's doors, the last scientists sealing their fate with a whisper, *, we knew too much, * too late, they understood. The future Thade tried to clip had grown fangs. And when Paul's visions turned to war, the Bene Gesserit's gardens were already dust. The debt unpaid was never theirs to owe, it was the Fremen's. It was Arrakis, a planet that had learned to bleed gold and would not stop. The name Arrakis was stricken. Now Arrakis, its dunes hold no gardens, only ghosts. Beneath the sand, the Imperial Conservatory's sealed chambers once bred spice, mutation secrets the Bene Gesserit purged to cage evolution. They feared what the Fremen might become, so they became curators of collapse. The honored matters rose not from ambition, but from the void left when knowledge was buried. A planet's biology, its very breath, was reduced to a commodity. The silent gardens remain, a vault of stillness, where the cost of control is etched in stone. Specialization carved the Imperium's bones, each house a cog, each alliance a thread. Fragile, precision cannot outrun entropy. The Fremen learned this first, their blood, once gold, now whispers of what was unmade. The Bene Gesserit won their war, but the price was a world that forgot how to grow. What is preserved in silence, not life, not legacy, a warning. The wind howls through Arrakis' veins, carrying the scent of what was stolen. Control is a garden left untended. It becomes a grave. The silent gardens were not gardens, They were vaults of forbidden truths, sealed to starve the Fremen of choices. Leto Roman II carved his golden path through fire and ash selfhood, devoured to feed survival's hollow core. The Missionaria Protectiva wove its lies like roots in sand, shaping faiths to steer evolution's blind crawl. Paul Atreides shattered their design, his visions exposing the Bene Gesserit's puppet strings. Yet the honored matters came later, not to mend, but to burn, erasing what the gardens held, fearing knowledge that could unmake empires. What equations of spice mutation were buried there, what maps of human potential folded into the wind's whisper. Leto's path demanded a god's sacrifice, to become both monster and messiah, a being of calculated longing. The Missionaria's false prophets, the Atreides' blade, the matter's rage all danced in the shadow of a truth too vast to hold. The garden's silence was not failure, it was mercy. Some knowledge once unearthed never rests, it devours its excavators. The cost of control was always the weight of eternity. Who among the dead would trade it back? The silent gardens, shattered husks of glass and bone, hold fragments in the gaps between what was erased. The spice that made gods was once a tool to shape gods. The Bene Gesserit did not merely hoard knowledge, he weaponized its absence. They knew the stillness in Arrakis' heart was not a void, but a vault. Mutagenic truths lay there, capable of bending Fremen blood to their will or breaking it. A lineage could be guided or shattered by a single unrecorded variable. Why bury such power? To make prescience a prison, not a promise. The Imperial Conservatory's sealed greenhouses did not grow life, they arrested it. Every locked vial, every charred ledger, a stitch in the fabric of what the Fremen could become. The erasure was not an accident, it was a design. The spice's whisper was too loud, its potential too wild to let evolve. What thrives in the dark is not decay, but calculation. The Bene Gesserit left no farm, no garden, only the shadow of a choice, to let humanity mutate or to cage it. The answer lies where the wind carves secrets into stone. What did the gardens know? What did they fear? The silent gardens were not gardens. Glass and sand held the blueprints of a future the Bene Gesserit could not afford to see. Seeds of transformation lay coiled in their vaults, mutations that might fracture prescience itself. The Imperium's survival hinged on a single truth: knowledge is a weapon that must never point back at its wielder. The Bene Gesserit's fear was not of spice, but of what it might make of them. A Fremen born with unshaped prescience would not walk the desert, he would unravel it. The Silent Garden's records spoke of such a path, a line of sight into a galaxy where the Bene Gesserit were not architects, but anomalies. Erasure was their answer, not fire, not sand, silence, the cycle tightens. The Imperium's control over information is not a shield, but a noose. Every buried scroll, every shattered vial of experimental spice, feeds the hunger that birthed the Fremen rebellion. Paul's visions were not a gift, they were a warning etched in time. To see too far is to become both prisoner and warden. What did the gardens fear? A future where the spice's voice was not theirs to command, where the wind carried not secrets but freedom. The weight of 1,000 futures lies in the dust, and still the question remains: who sealed the gardens? And who will break them open? The Spacing Guild's power over the stars is tied to spice. What if the Silent Gardens held the truth that could unravel their control? The Bene Gesserit erased knowledge to shape Fremen destiny. What other worlds guard secrets the Imperium?